a lot of opinions from multiple sources that are not necessarily in line with a faith-based perspective.
As friends, we often chat about many current topics and relationship issues.
Lend your ear and peep into our private conversation.
Welcome to Realistic Conversations,
A platonic perspective with Kay and Ryan. Hey, what's going on? How you doing, Ryan? It's been a minute.
Yeah, you know, I'm here. What's going on?
You know, same old, living the life, living the dream.
Oh, man. At least one of us is living.
Yeah, you doing good too.
I'm just dreaming.
Yeah, you'll wake up. How's your week?
My week was busy. One of those weeks.
Well, that's kind of good because it makes sure the week goes by. And as busy as you were, I do appreciate the call that we had earlier this week. And you know what? It's funny because when I was heading to work after our conversation, I thought about what we talked about. And it was really interesting, right? Because we had a quick convo about a situation. And you stated that the same thing that I was saying, you were saying in different words.
Yep.
And I thought about that. And I thought, no, we weren't saying the same thing.
No, we are.
In different words. I'm going to still disagree. But it dawned on me because it's so funny that, and yet it's not. So often, right, men versus women, we hear things differently. We respond to what we hear differently. And sometimes the way we communicate is completely different.
Communication is a skill that many of us don't have. For whatever reason, culturally, ethnic, stratification, I don't know. But a lot of people are lacking communication skills, right? Especially in a debate where I had to learn. Mm-hmm. I don't just hear to go for the jugular. I actually now begin to listen to get a better understanding of what the other person is saying.
Yes, that is good. And I will have to say that I had to learn over the years also that when I'm listening, don't listen to rebuttal or just give my viewpoint or my opinion. First, listen to understand what the other person is saying and then share. I'm not going to say that's always easy because, you know, I like to debate, but it's definitely something that we learn over time. But how many people are really willing to learn that or even understand that there is an issue? Because when we were talking, I really kept thinking, no, I'm not saying the same thing that you're saying at all. And you were like, we're saying the same thing. You know, so how many people even know and realize and take the time to figure out what is the best way to communicate and if they're communicating effectively?
Well, sometimes I think what happens in an argument or a heated debate, a lot of times either one person or both persons shut down and the listening is over, right? So when I begin to listen, I was like, okay, but we were saying the same thing. Sometimes is not to say, and I get it, sometimes the other person don't want the other person to know that they're right. Not necessarily that they're right, but when you're arguing and the person is saying the same thing, when you pass that threshold, and then to stop, pause, and think and say, you know what? I think you are right.
Oh, so that's what it was.
What, for you?
You just didn't want to tell me that I was right. Okay, because I was pondering and going over my mind. I was like, this man is making no sense. But you know what? I got it. That's cool.
Right? So sometimes when I literally sat there and listened to how you explained it, I'm like, she's actually saying the same thing. I am saying. And notice, I didn't give a rebuttal. I sat there and I listened.
No, you actually said, you're saying the same thing that I'm saying.
Yes, after you finished. I was like, I didn't interrupt you and say that. After you finished, I was like, You know, you're saying the same thing I'm saying.
That is too funny. And another thing I was sharing with a friend, I was watching an interview, and it was a couple on a show sharing some experience because some video went viral, right? And the folks that were interviewing them were asking them questions. And every time they asked a question, the woman started to answer the question. So then I'm looking at this and I'm thinking, okay, is it that the man just is an introvert or he doesn't like to speak? And so another question came, and then he did start to answer the question, and then the spouse started to finish the question or the answer for him. And I was like, oh my goodness. And I started to make more observations of, I find that we do that as women probably more often than we'd like to admit. What do you think's going on there? Is it that we are used to talking more?
I don't know if you're used to talking more, but I can't say what you're used to. What I have observed is the bickering amongst female as friends, right? Young girls. And I think that's something that you grow up doing. I can't really put my finger on it, but when I see like young girls arguing, going back and forth, always got to defend themselves. And then even in the workplace, especially if it's a male dominating field, you always have to be defending yourself. So a lot of times I think, I don't want to say it's natural. I just think it's a learned behavior. You don't agree? You're looking puzzled.
No, I don't think I don't agree. I'm just wondering if it's learned behavior, then for the women to be more vocal, right? Then is it also learned behavior for the man to just sit there and say nothing?
Well, sometimes it can be, because as a young boy growing up, sometimes my mother would say, shut up and sit there. And you can't,
she wouldn't say that to your sister?
Huh?
Would she say that also to your sister in terms of you being a child and being quiet? Do you think it was different based on gender?
I can't say it's, but remember, I can't say remember, but I've seen mother and daughter always go at it too. Sometimes, a lot of times, mother and daughters go at it. Sons and fathers go at it. Right? But mother and son, a lot of times it's out of frustration that they may go at it because he's not doing, well, obviously he's not doing what he's supposed to do. But a lot of times is we don't, as young boys in the household, sometimes we don't know how to express ourselves, and we're told to be quiet, sit down, and don't cry, and man up, and why are you crying? Why are you acting like a little girl? And so we just sit there and be quiet.
So you would say then it's conditioning to just sit and be quiet. So then how does that show up when you're a grown man?
Well, it could show up in different ways, right? Some men would be like, I'm not going to be that little boy, and they will voice their opinion. And then they're stereotyped as the angry black man or the aggressive black man. And some men would just be quiet and go into a shell, because growing up, they may never had the opportunity to express their feelings.
I know that some guys find it disrespectful when they're cut off.
Oh, well, I don't really find it disrespectful. It's just, I don't really find it disrespectful. It's just like, well, how can we have a conversation if you keep cutting me off? How can I tell you how I feel if you keep cutting me off?
But I think that's a good question. Is that what you usually say when that's happening?
Probably not.
You end up shutting down.
Huh?
You end up shutting down, right?
I do.
Mm-hmm.
Because you can't get a word in, so I automatically just shut down.
But then that adds to the toxicity and bad communication skills, because if you're shutting down because the other person is not practicing good listening skills, then the conversation ends.
But how can you? Okay, so you're trying to voice your side of the argument or a
Mhm.
conversation, but
Mhm.
you're not having a chance. So what's the point?
I could see how you would feel like it's pointless,
Mm-hmm.
but it's just making the observation to say, hey, you know what? I heard what you said. Now I'm trying to share my viewpoint, but you kind of cut me off. So I have a friend that always says to me, are you ready to listen to another perspective? And I love that, right? Because it makes me tune in and really listen.
Well, see, and that's why there's a difference between a debate, a conversation, and an argument.
Mm-hmm.
So in a conversation, I can see that happening. In the debate, I can see that happening too, a little. But if it's a full blown argument, sometimes that person, yeah, sometimes that person or both parties not really listening.
I totally agree with you because at that point, it's emotional
Yes.
and you really are, nobody's listening. Everyone,
Mhm.
each person is trying to prove their point and you're not going to resolve anything.
Yeah. Or how about when um a person repeats themselves to make sure you understand what they're saying?
Oh, what do you mean? Give an example.
You
I'm
would expect
laughing. I'm laughing because that would happen very often in my family.
they would break down the scenario, break it down to a molecule, down to the nucleus and the atom, and you say, listen, I clearly understand what you're saying. Breaking it down in a minute form is not going to change my viewpoint.
Exactly. The problem is not comprehension.
No.
The problem is I don't agree with you, and you're not going to make me agree with you because I understand your viewpoint.
Yes. And it's okay to and in relationships, some people have to understand it's okay to disagree.
Right.
It doesn't mean you're a bad person. It doesn't mean you don't know what you're talking about, but it's okay to disagree. I have a different point of view than you do.
Yeah, I agree. I do also think that sometimes we have to be careful of we'll agree to disagree because that can be just a blanket way
Cut
of
me off.
shutting it down, huh?
To cut me off and shut me down.
Yeah, to shut the person down, and you really aren't working on resolution. So, yes, it's okay to disagree, but I also think it's important to see why there are different viewpoints because it could be a conversation about a major issue or a major decision that has to be made. So, then how do you figure that out? If you're in a couple, if you're married, then that has to come to a resolution. Someone has to make the final call, and hopefully that couple would have some kind of method of what they've agreed to is who makes the final call. Like for me, I would hope that would be my husband that makes the final call and we say, hey, you know what, we're going to try it this way, but you got a good X number of times before we try it another way.
And one of the things I would like to share is if you try it his way and it doesn't work, it doesn't mean that he's a bad person and you throw it in his face. Sometimes people make mistakes or sometimes things happen beyond your control.
Yeah, that's a good one because I know that there are times where someone has a fail point or a flaw in their character, or they'll share something very sensitive and vulnerable with you. And then people will throw it back in their face. Like, so I gave you the opportunity to do this, and you invested X number of dollars and we lost it all.
So
And
here's the issue I have with that statement. So I gave you the opportunity.
I just want to point out that you cut me off, but go ahead.
Yeah. You was choking.
Go ahead.
Right? So I filled in the gap.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. So I have an issue when a person says to me, I gave you the opportunity.
Oh,
Yeah. If it's a discussion between a couple, how is it possible you're giving me an opportunity?
Wouldn't you say you're surrendering a decision to the other person?
Surrendering a
Yeah,
decision.
I'm submitting my will to do something else to the decision that you make. So I gave you the opportunity to do this thing for us.
Yeah, right. So that sounds good when it works, right? I give you the opportunity. We made $1 million. You're gonna call and tell all your homegirls, me and my husband decided to do this, yada yada yada. But if you do it and it fails, now all of a sudden it's his decision.
Mm,
And I gave him the opportunity, and once again it fails. And
mm.
then you go down the list of flaws that he has.
I could see how that could happen. So it's imperative then to really be focused on the whole we.
Exactly. We made a decision
Mm-hmm.
and it didn't work. What else can we do?
Mm-hmm.
Versus you made a decision. But when it works, guess who gets the credit? Is a we now.
Mm-hmm.
Right?
Mm-hmm.
It all of a sudden becomes a we. Everybody's French.
Yeah.
But when it doesn't work, it's a you.
That's how we are with God. So I can see how that shows up in our relationships.
Yeah, that's what Adam and Eve said. Eve said the serpent. Adam said the woman you gave me.
Yeah,
Right? We see the ugliness of sin showing up in the blaming game.
absolutely. Yeah. When things go well and we excel in certain areas, we take the credit. And then when they don't, we say, God, how could you do this? Pass the buck. And then in your example, too, in terms of a decision you might hand over to your husband and then you pass the blame, and it could be vice versa, male or female. It doesn't have to be just the husband. But there are
Mhm.
times, too, that people renege on agreements
Yeah.
that they make together. Like I know of a couple who, when they got married, they decided that they weren't going to have any children. But then after a couple of years, the husband said, was like, yeah, I do want 2 kids now. And so it caused a big problem because, first of all, it's much later than the woman would have felt comfortable trying to have kids. And then it was something that they literally discussed, supposedly were on the same page about. And to be honest, those are such major decisions. I don't know that we don't change our minds sometimes and don't have a different viewpoint sometimes, right? But that caused a big rift in the relationship and they're actually no longer together.
Yeah, I could see that, right? So unfortunately, when you have a relationship based on what you both agreed upon early, and then let's say 10 years later, a person changed their mind, I don't think it's fair to the other person. And I'm not saying you're wrong for changing your mind, but put yourself in that person's shoes. And that's one thing that in a lot of relationships we don't do. We don't put ourselves in the other person's shoes to see how it would feel if they sprung that up on us.
Well, I kind of feel like it's not a spring up on because there are times where you don't know that you're going to change your mind about a certain way about something you feel about passionately. So, for example, someone may say, okay, I'm going to be a housewife and I'm going to raise the kids, right? And you're comfortable with that. But then the kids are grown enough where you don't have to be as present in their lives. And so now the amount of time and energy that it required to raise those children, it's not necessary anymore. So now the woman feels, what am I going to do with my time? I want to do X, Y, and Z. So it's not oh, I just sprung this upon you. It's something that happened over time. The decision and the viewpoints transition with time. And we talk about growth all the time. So in that example, she grew into somebody else now.
Well, I do agree. No, I do understand what you're saying, but that example you just gave versus I want to have children, it's kind of different, and this is why I'm saying it's different. If the mom was a stay-at-home mom and now she wants to work because now the kids are, let's say the kids are 11, 12, or 13, right? Her going to work may not have a strain on the relationship because now the kids can come home, do their homework by themselves. They can come home and make a sandwich until either mommy and daddy come home to cook, or they can order out Uber Eats. That's a new thing now, right? Versus a man who waited X amount of years now to think about having children, which could technically be a strain on their relationship because they never really prepared to having children years later. What if she just got her dream job? Who's going to babysit? Depends on the age she is at the time. Is it healthy? Right? And sometimes as men, we could make selfish decisions if we want children, but guess who will have to raise those children by themselves sometimes?
Guess who has to have them?
Thank you. So for me to be a husband and put all that responsibility on my wife at a later age, I don't think is fair.
So I think what you're saying is the impact is different.
Yes, the impact is different. Yeah.
Yeah, I could see that. But it also depends on the viewpoint of the male, because if the husband has this impression that his wife is not going to work and that she should be there for the family at any time, and that there are certain things in the home that he wants her to support. We know some guys who don't eat food that's left overnight, those kind of things, then yeah, the impact is different, but there's still an impact.
Yeah, but those impacts are workable, right? You can work through those impacts. Right? The other one you probably can work through, but if she stays home, now you have one income while she's home, right? You may have you may have a bad pregnancy, right? There's a whole bunch of things that should be considered. And when I say spring up, like that's something you was thinking for a while, babes, I want to have a kid. And she's like, what?
Mm-hmm.
You know what I'm saying?
Mm-hmm.
So, and you literally have to sit down now and plan this family dynamics, because now you may have one or two extra mouths in the household. Who's going to babysit? Who's going to do this? Who's going to do that? And 9 times out of 10, the man is not going to give his job up to stay home and watch the kids.
I totally agree.
Yeah, so I think, and like for example, if the wife say, I think I want to have kids, how would you feel? So there's a whole bunch of things to consider. And unfortunately, that's one of those topics where if both people can't see eye to eye, I can see why they split.
Yeah, unfortunately, I don't know how, when it gets to those very, very deep conversations and decisions that have to be made, how you get to a middle ground. But I will say that I don't think in that situation they had external assistance or a mediator to try to help them get to that middle ground. And at one point, one of them ended up going full silent treatment, because now what they want is not being, their needs are not being met. And they felt that there isn't anything more to talk about at that point. And I think the worst way you can handle a disagreement is to completely shut down. I think that's so toxic.
I agree, it's toxic, right? And also for the person, but I don't know who shut down, was the person who presented the change of thought. Because if he's the one who shut down, but that's being very selfish. Because I don't want to say that's one of the foundations of why you got married. You met a like-minded person.
Hopefully.
You know what I'm saying? In that case, both of them.
Oh, yes.
Yeah, met a person and they were like-minded, going in one direction, all of a sudden
True.
you want to change.
Yep.
And there's nothing wrong with changing, but you can't expect a person to want to change because you want to change. And that's where the difficulty comes in. And unless one person is willing to sacrifice their wants for the other person, it ain't going to work.
Yeah, the sacrifice is always the issue, I think, in relationships, right? It's really how much am I willing to give? And then and then sometimes instead of having that hard-hitting conversation, people want the other person to read between the lines and figure things out. Like, well, you should know me by now to know how I'm feeling. You should know me by now to know what I'm thinking. And it's just the things that we do are so ridiculous. And we expect things to work smoothly.
Especially the person who keeps giving in or who thinks they keep giving in, eventually they'll be frustrated.
Yeah.
Because they're the ones who keep giving in over and over and over and over. And eventually they will start keeping tabs. And that's when the breakdown of communication happens, where they will go back into the past and show you everything that they did to adjust to you.
That's funny you mentioned about keeping tabs. So remember that book, Men Are From Mars and Women Are From Venus?
Mm-hmm.
So the author is Dr. John Gray, and he talks about how we as women and men have completely different perspectives and scoring systems. So where for women, we have a lot of little things that we're keeping tabs on. Men are looking at the big picture always, like, hey, this is very important to the family, and this is very important to my spouse, or this is very important to my job. And it's the major wins for them that makes them feel like they're hitting out the park. Versus for women, we're like tallying up all these little things. Are you holding up your finger to show like a small
things
perspective? Yep. All these little things, and we're like, oh yeah, that equals big love. And it can really be a struggle if we're not, like you said, being selfless and really having the conversations. For me, as you know, I will tell you straight up what my love languages are. And I will also make sure I know what yours are, because I think that it helps guide us towards making sure we can be selfless with one another. It's not always going to be perfect, right? Because I know for me, I always default to my love language. But I do always feel that it's very important to know exactly how can I really pour into this other person.
Love language is something that's relatively new. Well, relatively new for some of us. But can you imagine back in the days about 20 years ago when no one knew about love languages?
I personally think that we didn't know what it was called, but we always knew what it was. Right?
Yeah, but
you always knew what someone liked that you were interested in, because you would make decisions on what you do for someone based on, hey, I know that my girlfriend likes to go to the beach, so I'm going to surprise her with a trip to the beach. Her love language was quality time. But you just didn't know it was called quality time.
Unfortunately, a lot of men back in the days did things that they thought was traditional.
What do you mean?
They bought flowers for their women or chocolates. Meanwhile, some women didn't like flowers.
20 years ago?
No, I'm just saying, some men make decisions based on tradition. So Valentine's Day, dudes are going buy flowers, even if sometimes their women don't like flowers, because they think that's traditionally the thing to do.
Yeah, and I don't think there's anything wrong with that.
Of course, there's something wrong with that.
I personally don't think there's anything wrong with that, because if it's for Valentine's Day and you know that to be a tradition, then that's fine. But what I would hope is that he shows up at other times, it doesn't have to be a holiday, to express love in the way that he thinks I like love to be expressed. So for me personally, I don't think that's a big deal. I don't like chocolate, but I'll take it on Valentine's Day.
Yeah, but you have some people like, that's your
default.
Yeah. Meanwhile, the woman don't even like flowers. And there's a lot of women who don't like flowers. So dudes like, oh my God, I got flowers Valentine's Day. No.
Yeah,
And you didn't put no thought into it. Like, what does she really like?
I agree. Like roses aren't my favorite, so I'll take them, but I preferred my favorite flowers. So typically my exes would do that and, find out what it is and then move accordingly. So
I
it
like
is,
the smirk.
it's not good that some folks default. It isn't good, but that's where good communication is important, right? I will have to say I'm guilty of saying to someone, hey, buying roses every week just to buy roses is not going to cut it. The message was right, but how I delivered it was not right, so we have to be careful on how we're communicating to each other.
Yes, that's true, because interesting you say that. So me and my friend had a conversation the other day. We talk about, the social media. A lot of black men are going to foreign countries and dating women, and women. Some women are saying that we just want submissive women. And in the conversation, I was thinking, you know what? I don't think it's necessary that a man wants a slave. I think that most men want to be respected and appreciated, right? And especially for a black man, a lot of times we have to dummy down outside of our homes. And if you are at home and you're not getting that at home, that could bring a strain on the relationship as well. And that's why sometimes when we find someone we can confide in, then that may lead to other things that shouldn't be happening, right? And I saw when the dude said that if I share how I feel to my wife, I am automatically wrong.
What?
He says, if I share how I feel to my wife, we go into an argument.
Because he can't have his own opinion?
Because he says that when he shares with his wife how he really feels or what she does, how it makes him feel, she take it personal and she go into argumentative mode.
I don't understand what's happening there.
I mean, I don't understand why she do it, but that's what he said. So he says a lot of times he would have to make a choice. Do I share how I feel and get into argument, or do I just hold it inside?
That's terrible.
Horrible.
So it's funny you mentioned about how men will go outside, because I don't know what the current statistics are, but in the past, the stats were that most men who have affairs were not having affairs for the sex. They were having affairs with someone because they were being heard and they felt respected and they felt like their opinion mattered.
Yep.
And
We
that's,
can't say that's for everybody, but
well, the majority
the
basically,
majority.
right? And so I think sometimes we kind of make excuses to say that, men are men and they're just going to cheat, but we have to also take responsibility. What is it that's happening that would even give that man the thought to want to entertain it? Again, not a blanket pass to say cheating is okay.
Yeah, we're not saying that.
But where do I hold responsibility? And in that situation that you shared with that woman, that's sad because there is no place for him to be honest, open, and vulnerable. So, with the men that are also going overseas and marrying some of these women, I think that there's more to it than they're just looking for submissive women. But I also would question, well, what kind of women are you dating in the States that you have to make such an extreme leap to find someone in another country and invest in that person versus just really, really putting the women that you're dating to the test early on and narrowing your choices? What are your priorities? If you're meeting the same kind of woman over and over, then is it really the women?
That's a good question. because like sometimes we are attracted to similar women with similar traits, and also sometimes I think that from my experience from before, some women struggle with respecting their men,
Uh,
right? So for example, if a man do something, is told that we're supposed to do that, but just that we're supposed to do it, it doesn't mean we want to hear thank you every once in a while,
true.
right? So when we do it, it's like, all right.
But do you think that's a disrespect thing, or that is just not being in the presence or used to sharing gratitude?
Well, I don't know what it is, but it all depends on how the man receives it, right? So every man would receive that differently.
Uh-huh.
But it's good to show appreciation every once in a while because he's not getting it anywhere else.
I would say it's good to show appreciation all the time.
Well, yeah, but I'm saying, right? I mean, you're not going to give appreciation because he took the garbage out, but at least sometimes let the husband know that he's appreciated for the things that he do. Yes, he should do it, but he may not have to do it.
That's true, because I know that I've been guilty of being spoiled in terms of the expectation that a guy is going to just do something for me. So because he's doing it all the time, I might not say, hey, you know what? I notice you take the time to come by and put my garbage out on Thursdays. I really appreciate that. I might say it every now and then when I realize Thursday passed.
Oh, how you say Sugarfoot recycling?
But you never know what you got till it's gone. But yeah, right? You're right. It is imperative that we pause and appreciate each other for those things.
Exactly.
And
And women,
effective communication, right? Effective
yeah.
communication.
And women would share how they feel, right? A lot of women would share with their husbands when he do certain things, how it makes them feel. And sometimes as a man, depending on who your woman is, you have to think twice before you share how you feel about certain things.
Yeah, like that situation you shared is really sad to me.
It's very sad because now there's a saying that a lot of men will say, I pick and choose my battles.
That's just being smart.
Yes.
You can't,
because now you don't want to you don't want to bicker at everything. Right? But it's still sad that you have to pick and choose your battles.
So what's the solution?
I think the solution, one, would be not to take things personal when it's coming from your spouse. They are not saying that you are a bad person. They're just saying that some of the things that you do, it makes me feel this way.
That's good. I think another approach could be some people don't communicate well verbally, communicate better when they write. So maybe with that situation, when the guy is sharing with his spouse, instead of him verbally sharing, maybe if he wrote it, she could process it differently. And another thing is to make sure that y'all come to the table on how you're going to communicate to each other. Yes, and really establish that.
Yeah, I mean, when they say communication is the key, they ain't lying. Right? Communication is the engine that drives the marriage. It can either make it go nice and smooth, or it'd be a rough and rocky road. Yeah, if one person is not able to voice how they feel, but they're told how to feel.
And then we also have to understand and give grace and recognize where people's experiences and their past and what they're familiar with has an effect on us too, right? So like culturally, having the Caribbean background, there are just certain ways of communication that to others from the outside might look like there's madness and chaos and unruliness and unrest. And really, it's just brawling communications, very passionate communication. Italians are the same way, Asians are the same way. So it's giving grace to some of that too. But also, I think, hey, regardless of that, doesn't give you a pass to just say what you want to say, how you want to say it at any time, and come to an agreement on, hey, this is who we are. This is how we show up in our relationship. How are we going to deal with talking to each other, listening to each other, not reneging on things we agree with, and giving gratitude and respecting one another? What does that look like?
Not only that, right? Not only that, right? But also understanding, because I'm sure before you get married, these things were happening while you were dating.
Maybe.
Nah. If you take 2 to 3 years to get married, you're going to see that person or their family.
Maybe, but to be honest, most folks aren't taking that long these days.
Well, yes. But that's what I'm saying. If you take about 2 to 3 years to get married, you will see that person in action culturally, traditionally, emotionally, financially, right? If you hurry up and rush and get married, then there are a lot of things you may not see.
Right. So that's why I do say at least finish a season. I believe in that concept and theory. Finish a season with someone while dating so you can know how they are throughout the whole year, but also have those conversations, visit the families and see what things look like. And even the visits might not give you a full picture, but it gives you some insight. But it's having those really serious talks all the time. What does this look like to you? How do we handle this kind of scenario? Because a lot of times people don't do like scenarios when they're doing counseling, premarital counseling. They just talk about the basics of what marriage is, but there are big decisions that can come up.
I got 2 cousins, my cousin and her husband from Barbados, right? When they come to visit, they'll be loud and sound like they're arguing, meanwhile they're cracking jokes.
Yeah. Pure love. Loud love.
Yep. Oh, my, and then all of a sudden, are you ready?
Speaking of ready. Speaking of ready. Always great conversation. Always good communication. Thank you for admitting that I was right.
You're cutting me off. Okay, good. You learned nothing from this conversation. All right, we have to have a part 2.
I literally did not cut you off. See that?
I have a part 2.
You heard one thing, I heard another. Talk to you later. Good chatting as always.
All right. Yeah, it's always a pleasure. My platonic friend, later.
See you later. Bye.
Later.
Hey, thanks for listening to this week's conversation.
If you like what you heard and want to listen to what we chat about next, please look for Realistic Conversation Podcast on all streaming platforms.
And if you're watching us on YouTube, go ahead and peep into our next episode by clicking the subscribe button. You'll then be notified of when we post next. See you soon.
See you soon.